Section 6 of A Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers. Account of the River of La Plata. The River of La Plata, being the south boundary of Brazil, within the limits of the South Sea Company, and lying conveniently for opening a great trade from the North Sea with Peru, Chile, and other vast countries, I shall give a description of it here from the best authors. The first European who discovered it seems to have been Juan Diaz de Solis, who, sailing from Spain in 1512, some say 1515, ran along the coast of Brazil till he came to this river, says Ovalle. With him agree the manuscripts taken on some Spanish priests in this river by Captain Witherington, published in Harrison's Collections, where we are told de Solis obtained the government of this river, but was murdered by the natives with most of his men in 1515. The next who came hither was Sebastian Cabot in 1526, but his men being mutinous, he had not the desired success, though he sailed 150, some say 200 leagues up this river, and purchasing many pieces of gold and silver plate from the natives, who called this river Parama, he called it the River of Plate, because he thought it to be the product of the country, which was afterwards found to be a mistake. Yet upon his report in 1530, when he returned, the Emperor Charles V sent Don Peter Mendoza, one of his chief grandees, with 2200 men besides mariners, to plant a colony here in 1535, and they had so great hopes of finding mines of gold and silver that above 30 heirs of noble families went on the expedition, and sailing 50 leagues up the river, where the air was good, he founded a town, which from thence was called Buenos Aires. They built a fort and enlarged the town, but as they were carrying on their work, the natives attacked them, and overpowering them with numbers, killed 250, among whom were several of the chief men. This obliged the Spaniards to keep within their fort, where they suffered much by famine. Mendoza returned towards Spain, but died miserably, with many of his companions, for want of provisions by the way. His deputy general, Oyola, sailed up into Paraguay in quest of a country said to abound with gold and silver, but was treacherously slain by the natives with all his followers. Irala, who was his deputy and left at Buenos Aires, contracted a friendship with some of the natives called Guaranians. In 1538 he built Asunción in their country, which is now the metropolis of Paraguay, and left Buenos Aires for a time. Asunción lies on the banks of the river Paraguay in southern latitude 25, 240 leagues from the sea, and 40 from the mouth of the river Paraguay, where it falls into La Plata. These rivers, after they join, continue their natural colour for several miles, La Plata being clear and Paraguay muddy. The latter is by much the most considerable river, and the adjacent country abounds with mines of gold and silver, and is navigable above 200 leagues. The river of Uruguay falls into Paraguay on the right side, and runs a course of 300 leagues, according to Sepp the Jesuit, who in his Voyage says 'tis as big as the Danube at Vienna. In short, as to this river La Plata, authors are not agreed. Some of the Jesuits who are missionaries in those countries think it to be the same with that called Paraguay higher up in the country, and that it has a communication with the northeast coast of Brazil by the river St. Mary, which rises out of the same lake and runs northeast as Paraguay or Plata runs south, and afterwards to the southeast when it falls into the sea. Be that how it will, here are many rivers which fall into the same channel on both sides, but that which is commonly called La Plata begins near the town of that name about south latitude 19, and after running north a little way takes its course southeast till it join the river Paraguay, so that I choose rather to trust the account given us by Mr. White, our linguist, who, having dwelt long in that country, told me this river derives its name from the town of La Plata, a sort of metropolis to which there lies an appeal from other jurisdictions. He adds that 'tis a pretty town, has 14 churches with a cathedral and 4 nunneries, and lies northwest from Buenos Aires about 500 leagues, which requires commonly 2 months and a half's travel. All are agreed that La Plata is very large at the mouth, where some account it 50 and others 30 leagues broad. The mouth of it is dangerous because of the sands, and therefore requires pilots. Knivet, in his description of the West Indies, says the best way to avoid those sands is to keep near the north shore till you have come to a high mountain white at top, and then to sail 4 leagues south to another small hill on the north side, near which you must sail. This brings you into a fair bay, where you must still keep along shore, and after passing the west point of this bay you come to the river Maror, and then there are no more shoals between that and Buenos Aires. La Plata runs into the sea about south latitude 35, and sometimes overflows the country for several miles, when the natives put their goods into canoes and float about till the inundation assuages, and then they return to their habitations. Ovalle gives the following account of this river, namely, that it runs with such a mighty stream into the sea as makes it fresh for a great way, that the water of this river is very sweet, clears the voice and lungs, and is good against all rheums and defluxions, that the people who dwell about it have excellent voices and are all inclined to music, that it petrifies the branches of trees and other things which fall into it, and that vessels are naturally formed of its sand, which are of various figures, look as if they were polished by art, and keep water very cool. It breeds great store of excellent fish of divers sorts, and most beautiful birds of all kinds are seen on its banks. Sepp informs us that this river and Uruguay abound so with fish that the natives catch great numbers of them without any other instrument than their hands. One of the choicest, called the king's fish, is small without bones, and taken only in winter. Our author says he never saw any European fish in this latter, except one that the Spaniards called bocado, and that the fish are larger here than ours, of a dark or yellow colour, and well tasted, which he ascribes to the nature of the water, that though drunk in great quantities, even after raw fruit, helps digestion and never does any hurt. The plains about this river are so large and even, without any obstruction to the sight, that the sun seems to rise and set in them. Their way of travelling in those plains is by high carts covered with hoops and cowhides like our wagons, with conveniency for travellers to sleep in the bottom, which is so much the better because they travel most by night to avoid the heat. They are drawn by oxen, which are frequently so pinched by drought that when they come toward any water which they smell at a great distance, they run furiously to it and drink up the very mud which they raise with their feet. This obliges travellers to furnish themselves with water and other provisions for their journey, there being no water to be had except by rain, so that travellers are frequently as much distressed for want of water as the oxen, and can scarce get any that's clear at the watering places, though they send beforehand, because the oxen run with so much haste to it that they make it all in a puddle. Ovalle says that in this case travellers are forced to stop their noses and shut their eyes when they drink it. The journey through these plains is at least 14 or 20 days, without any place of shelter or any firing to dress their victuals but the dry dung of cattle. Yet there are several lakes and ponds where inns might be fixed, but 'tis neglected because there's no settled trade that way. It remains to give some account of the towns upon the river Plata and on the road to Potosi. 1. Buenos Aires lies upon the river 50 leagues from the sea, about latitude 36. Our linguist informed me that 'tis the residence of a Spanish governor, is defended by a stone fort mounted with 40 guns, and is generally garrisoned by 400 or 500 men. The harbour is pretty good, but troublesome in a northwest and west wind. The river is 7 leagues broad there, and navigable by ships 60 leagues above the town, but no further because of a great cataract. The town has 1 cathedral and 5 other churches. The Portuguese had a settlement over against this town, but were dislodged by the Spaniards at the beginning of this war, since which time the French drive a Guinea trade hither for negroes, who are sent overland to Peru and Chili and yield them vast profit. The trade from hence to Spain is in hides and tallow, silver from Peru, and gold and silver from Chili. All European goods yield a good price here. They have plenty of fruit trees about the town of all kinds, both of the hot and cold climates, and have store of wheat and other European grain, besides Indian corn. Thousands of cattle of all sorts run wild in the neighbourhood, and they furnish Peru with 50,000 mules per annum. In short, this place lies very convenient for commerce in silver and gold, and the other commodities of Peru and Chili, which the French have now begun to engross. They send 3 ships to those parts, and the South Sea, under M. de Beauchesne-Gouin of Saint-Malo in 1698, of whose progress I shall give a further account from a copy of his journal as I go on with my description of the coasts. Gouin de Beauchesne, a captain in the French merchant service, his celebrated Voyage occupied nearly 3 years. Their winter here is in May, June, and July, when 'tis cold by night, but warm enough by day, the frost never being violent, nor the snow considerable in those parts. Father Sepp, who was here in 1691, tells us in his Voyage from Spain to Paraguaya, or Paraguay, that Buenos Aires has only 2 streets built crosswise, that there are 4 convents, one of which belongs to the Jesuits, that their houses and churches are built of clay and not above 1 story high, that the Jesuits have taught them of late to burn lime and make tiles and bricks, with which they now begin to build. The castle is likewise of clay, encompassed with an earthen wall and a deep trench, and defended by 900 Spaniards, though in case of necessity above 30,000 Indian horse might be armed out of the several cantons, where they have been trained by the Jesuits. But this boasting account I can't believe. They have in the neighbourhood whole woods of peach, almond, and fig trees, which they propagate by putting the kernels in the ground. They grow so fast as to produce fruit the first year, and their timber is used for fuel. The adjacent pastures are so fat and large that many thousands of beeves feed together, so that any one, when he pleases, goes into the field, throws a rope about their horns, and brings them home and kills them. They are very large, generally white, and being so numerous, are valued only for their hides, tallow, and tongues, the rest being exposed to the birds and beasts of prey, which are very numerous and frequently destroy the calves. The natives feed most on beef half raw, without bread or salt, and in such quantities that they throw themselves naked into cold water that they may retain the natural heat within their entrails to help digestion, and sometimes they lie down with their stomachs in hot sand, but their gluttony in devouring so much raw flesh fills them so with worms that they seldom live till 50 years old. There are such numbers of partridges here, and so tame, that they knock them down with sticks as they walk in the fields. The missionaries, who are absolute masters of the natives in the neighbouring cantons of Paraguay, and etc., suffer none of them to come nearer Buenos Ayres than 2 or 3 leagues, on pretence that they would be corrupted by the ill example of the Spaniards, and under that same pretence they won't suffer the Spaniards to settle in their missions, which extend above 200 leagues up the river, nor do they allow merchants who trade thither to stay above a few days, the true cause of which is that they are not willing that the laity should be privy to the wealth they heap up there in a country which abounds with gold, nor be witness to their splendid, or rather luxurious, ways of living. Sometimes complaints of this procedure of the Jesuits have been made to the Spanish governors, but they find a way to bribe them to silence. This I was informed of by those who have been among them, and am confirmed in it by Father Sepp. He does not dissemble that the missionaries have a despotical power over the natives, though he gives it another turn, and pretends that 'tis necessary in order to convert and force them to work. He says the Jesuits are captains, teach them the use of arms, and how to draw up into squadrons and battalions, which he boasts they do as well as the Europeans. The Jesuits obtained this power on the specious pretence of reducing those Indians to the obedience of the Spaniards, which they would not submit to till within these few years. This management is so much the more easily carried on because the ecclesiastical government there is lodged in the hands of 1 bishop only and 3 canons, and the missionaries being composed of all nations, few of them have any natural affection to the Spanish government. This is the more to be observed because the Jesuits, being an intriguing society, and generally in the French interest, it would seem to be the concern of the Allies to recover the trade of those countries from the House of Bourbon with all possible speed, left by making themselves masters of the vast treasures of Peru and Chili, they be enabled at last to complete their design of an universal monarchy. Father Sepp says that silver in 1691 was cheaper here than iron, that for a 2-penny knife one may have a crown, for a hat of 2 shillings 10 or 12 crowns, and for a gun of 10 or 12 shillings 30 crowns, that provisions are so plenty here that a fat cow may be bought for the value of 10 pence or 12 pence, a good ox for a few needles, a stout horse for about 2 shillings, that he has seen 2 given for a knife not worth 6 pence, and that he and his company had 20 horses for a few trifles that did not cost them a crown, being only a few needles, fish hooks, sorry knives, tobacco, and a little bread. He mentions a cataract in the river Uruguay, which he says Providence has placed here for the advantage of the poor Indians against the avarice of the Spaniards, who, not being able to go further with their vessels, have been hitherto confined to Buenos Ayres, and could not settle in those cantons, though very inviting, because of the vast profit they might draw from them. This he reckons a great happiness to the natives, who, being a simple people, would not only be infected with the vices of the Spaniards, but enslaved by him, for, says he, they make no difference betwixt pagan and Christian natives, but treat them promiscuously like dogs. He adds that this province of Paraguaya, or Paraguay, exceeds in bigness Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands put together, wherein I doubt he exceeds; that they have no cities, are governed by 80 colleges of Jesuits, in which there are no more than 160 persons, and that these colleges are from 100 to 600 miles distant from one another. There's one plain of 200 leagues long betwixt Buenos Ayres and Corduba in Tucuman, without so much as a tree or cottage, and yet it contains the best pastures in the world, filled with cattle of all sorts which have no owners. He describes the natives thus: the men are not quite so tall as Europeans, but have thick legs and large joints. Their faces are round, flattish, and of an olive colour, and their arms are bows and arrows. Some of the strongest have many scars on their bodies, occasioned by wounds which they gave themselves when young, that these scars may be remaining proofs of their courage. Their hair is black, long, and as strong as that of a horse. The women look more like devils than rational creatures, with their hair loose over their foreheads, and the rest twisted in locks behind, which hang as low as their hips. Their faces are wrinkled, their arms, shoulders, and breasts naked, and their ornaments are of fish bones, made like scales of mother of pearl about their necks, arms, and hands. The wives of their caciques, or petty princes, wear a sort of triple crowns of straw. The caciques wear doe skins hanging over their shoulders, the rest only a piece of skin wrapped around their middle and hanging down before to their knees. The boys and girls are quite naked. They have holes in their ears and chins, in which they put fish bones or a coloured feather tied by a thread, and feathers of several colours fastened to a string round their necks. They wrap their infants as soon as born in a tiger skin, give them the breast for a little while, and then half raw meat to suck. He says the men at the death of their nearest relations cut off a finger of their own left hand, and if it be a handsome daughter, they make a feast and drink out of her skull. They live in straw huts without roofs, and their utensils are a few sticks for spits and pumpkins hollowed out, in which they eat their meats. Their beds are the hides of oxen or tigers spread on the ground, but the caciques and those of note lie in a net fastened to 2 poles for hammocks, at some distance from the ground, being a security against wild beasts and serpents. Our author says that he sent well-boiled meat to several of them when sick, which they received thankfully, but afterwards gave it to their dogs, because they liked their own cookery better. It is now time to see how the missionaries live among those flocks over whom they assume the pastoral care. Father Sepp tells us that he and other new missionaries were welcomed by some of them with 20 musicians in a train, abundance of boats equipped like galleys lined with firelocks, and having drums, trumpets, and hautboy on board. The missionaries brought them sweetmeats and all sort of fruit, and the Indians diverted them by wrestling in the water and salvos of their firearms, etc. They conducted them through a green triumphal arch to the church, where the women were so earnest at their devotion that not one of them cast an eye upon our father and his companions, so that here were a militant and a triumphant church both together. When the devotion was over, the chief of the Indians welcomed the father and the rest of the missionaries by a short but very pathetic speech, and one of the Indian women did the like with wonderful elegancy, says the Jesuit, who, it seems, is not against women speaking in the church. That and the next day they spent in mirth and jollity, and in the evening were diverted by 4 dances: 1, by boys who danced with pikes and lances; 2, by a couple of fencing masters; 3, by 6 seamen; 4, by 6 boys on horseback, who afterwards gave them a kind of tournament, the place being illuminated by ox horns filled with suet, for they have no oil nor wax. On Whit Sunday, which happened soon after, the missionaries went to church and returned thanks for so many converts, as certainly they had reason, since they were such merry ones. These cantons, he says, are 26, and have but 1 or 2 missionaries apiece. though they contained from 3,000 to 6,000 people each, and sometimes more, so that they must either have too much work or perform it very slightly, especially if they be so ignorant, as our father says, that if they be neglected one day, they scarce know how to make the sign of the cross the next. And besides all the pastoral work, the missionaries must act the part of clerks and clean the church ornaments and plate, for these poor wretches are incapable of doing it. To be short, says he, the missionary must be cook, nurse, doctor, architect, gardener, weaver, smith, painter, baker, potter, tile maker, and everything else that is necessary in a commonwealth. This, he supposes, will appear incredible, and he's certainly in the right, but he says 'tis the naked truth, the natives being so stupid that unless he plainly show his Indian cook how much salt he must put in each pot, he would put all into one, though ever so much, and he must see them wash the vessels, unless he would be poisoned. Yet this father, for all his other hard work, must look after his garden, orchard, and vineyard, where he has all sorts of flowers, herbs, roots, and fruits, and so many vines as produce 500 large casks of wine in a year, if not prevented by multitudes of pismires, wasps, birds, or by the north winds, which sometimes make wine so dear that a cask yields 20 or 30 crowns, and after all 'tis not to be preserved from turning sour without a great mixture of lime. The chief distemper of the natives is the worms before mentioned, the bloody flux, dysentery, and spotted fever, which frequently carry off great numbers. The medicines which the missionaries give against worms is a vomit of tobacco leaves, and after that sour lemon juice, with those of mint and rue put into milk. These cantons or towns, he says, are generally upon an ascent near the rivers Uruguay and Paraguay, and contain young and old from 6,000 to 8,000 souls. Each canton has a church and a square market-place near it, the rest being divided into streets of clay huts covered with straw, only of late they begin to use tiles. They have no windows, chimneys, or different apartments, and over the fireplace they hang their beds at night. Their doors are ox hides, and since all lie together in one room with their dogs, cats, etc., the missionaries are entertained with very ungrateful scents besides smoke when they go to visit them. He says in the main they are very patient under distempers and the death of relations, that they seek after no riches but a present maintenance, that their young women are marriageable at 14 and the men at 16, when the missionaries take care to match them, otherwise they will pair themselves. There are no disputes here about dowries, jointures, or marriage settlements. The agreement consists only in 2 articles, namely, the woman promises to fetch what water the husband wants from the river, and he engages to provide the kitchen with fuel. The missionaries furnish them with huts, the wedding clothes, and dinner. The wedding suit is 5 yards of coarse woolen stuff for each, the dinner is a fat cow, and the bed some ox hides. He presents them also with a little salt and a few loaves, and then they treat their parents. The women court here come to the missionary and tell them they have a mind to such a man if he will give his consent, which if he do, the match is made, and the missionary is both priest and father. How mean soever the natives live, the priests have enough of splendour and plenty. Their churches and steeples are lofty, have 4 or 5 bells apiece, most of them a couple of organs, altars, and pulpits richly gilt, images well painted, plenty of silver candlesticks, chalices, and other church plate, and the ornaments of the priests and altars are as rich as in Europe. They teach the natives to sing and play on all musical instruments, both for devotion and war, so that, according to the Jesuits, they go now more merrily to heaven than formerly they did to hell, and the good fathers divert themselves with sets of musicians on the banks of the rivers and in charming islands. Nor can we wonder that they live so merrily, since they fare so well, for besides all sorts of delicious fruits and preserves, They have plenty of fowl, fish, and venison of all sorts, as well as ordinary butcher's meat. Only the tigers, which are very numerous, frequently put in for a share with them, invade their flocks and their followers, but if you'll believe our father, they never attack the clergy. They have such a respect for the cloth, and are so civil to Europeans, that they'll charge the Indians in their company and let them go scot-free, and the serpents, which likewise abound here, are charmed by Ave Marys into the like good manners. The priests use honey for their salads, for they have no oil, so that they are very hard put to it. They had silver in such plenty, says the father, that old shoes and hats were much more valuable. And as if the missionaries had not work enough otherwise, Father Sepp tells us the natives, when they kill their cows, bring them to the good Jesuits to allow each their share, and to be sure the hides fall to the missionaries. For he says the 3 ships which brought him and his company from Spain carried back 300,000 ox hides, which they had for nothing, and each hide, he says, would yield them 6 crowns at home. A good horseshoe, he says, is here worth 6 horses, and the bit of a bridle worth 3. An ell of linen is worth 4 or 5 crowns, for they have no hemp or flax, but store of cotton, and 1 sheep, lamb, or kid is, for the sake of the wool, worth 3 oxen or cows. Though the natives, he says, are so dull that they can't do the most frivolous thing without direction, yet they are so good at imitation that if you give them models they will make anything very well. Thus, he says, the Indian women, after ripping a piece of bone lace with a needle, will make one by the same pattern very exactly. And so the men do trumpets, hautboys, organs, or watches, and copy pictures, printing, and writing to admiration. But they are so lazy that they must be forced to their work by blows at the direction of the missionaries, who, though they convert them themselves, make them cudgel one another. This they take very patiently, give no ill language, but cry Jesu Maria, and thank the good fathers into the bargain for taking such care of them, so that they have learnt passive obedience to perfection. But to make them amends, our author says the missionaries teach their young ones to dance as well as to sing in the church, when they are habited in rich apparel, so that they are extremely taken with the ornaments of our religion, says he, which raises in them a high esteem and affection, and indeed 'twould be a wonder if it should not. The missionaries do now take care to instruct both sexes in all necessary employments, reading, writing, etc. They have also taught them to make images, especially of Our Lady of Ottigan, and very good reason, for if we believe Sepp, she has done abundance of miracles there. The fathers wear caps like a bishop's, and black linen cassocks when they go abroad, and instead of canes use crosses, which have a peculiar virtue, to knock serpents on the head. The soil is so fruitful that it produces 100-fold, though sorely manured. The natives sow nothing but turkey wheat, and scarce enough of that, they are so lazy, and are likewise such bad husbands that they would eat all at once, did not the missionary force them to lay it up in his barn, where he distributes it to them as they want, and so he does their flesh. They have no mills, but pound their wheat in a mortar, and make it into cakes, which they bake on coals or boil with their meat. The fathers have white bread for themselves, which the natives value so much that they will give 2 or 3 horses for a loaf, and of these the missionaries have good store, for they have always 40 or 50 acres sowed with wheat for themselves. Land, corn, cattle, and everything is theirs, so that they call all the people their sons and daughters, and perhaps there is just cause enough to give many of them that title. These lords proprietors assign every family their number of cows and oxen to till their ground and to eat, though one would think they might have enough for the taking, without asking anybody's leave, And yet our father says he has been forced to chide his parishioners for killing and eating their oxen and roasting them with their wooden ploughs in the very field while they were tilling the ground, for which they pleaded in excuse that they and their wives were hungry and weary, and yet there was no great reason for the latter, since their ploughs, says our author, don't enter above 3 inches into the ground. They need no hay for their cattle, since they go up to the knees in grass all the year. This is the way of living in those cantons, which the missionaries call reductions, because, if you'll believe me, they have reduced them to Christianity by their preaching, though the Spaniards could never do it by their arms. Our linguist told me that the road from Buenos Aires to Chili is only passable in the summer months, when commodities are purchased at that town and transported by land to Chili. On that road, about 100 leagues northwest from Buenos Aires, lies the city of Cordova, which is the see of a bishop, has 10 churches and a university. 'Twas founded in 1573, says Father Techo, by a native of Cordova in Old Spain, when there were 60,000 archers reckoned in its territory, about 8,000 of whom continued in subjection, but the others revolted. 'Tis now the metropolis of the province, and the Jesuits have a chapel in their college there, which for riches and beauty may vie with the best in Europe. The natives of this country were very barbarous, made use of sorcery to satisfy their revenge, and of philters of their own blood to gratify their lust. Both sexes daubed their faces with strange colours, and each village was governed by a sorcerer who pretended to be their physician. To show their courage, they would draw arrows through the skins of their bellies, and they fought duels with sharp stones, standing foot to foot and holding down their heads to receive the blows from one another by turns. He that struck first was reckoned the most fearful. It was accounted disgraceful to dress their wounds, and the conqueror was applauded by hideous shouts from the spectators. 'Twas a long time before the missionaries could reform those barbarous customs. Another town on this road is Mendoza, where they make large quantities of wine, brandy, and oil. So much for that part of this vast country which lies toward Chili and Brazil. I shall next come to that part which lies toward Peru, and particularly the road to Potosi and the mines. Santa Fe is the next Spanish settlement of note to Buenos Aires, from which it lies 80 leagues northwest at the mouth of a river which falls into La Plata. The country betwixt this town and Buenos Aires is fruitful, well inhabited by Spaniards and Indians, and produces wheat from 40 to 100-fold, and abounds with cattle. The town is encompassed with a river and built of brick. Our prisoners and linguist told us that there are mines of gold and silver in the neighbourhood, but the Spaniards don't care to open them, because the conveniency of sailing up the river might encourage enemies to invade and take them from them. This town was built by the Spaniards when they first settled for the defence of this river. Saint Juago de Listero, 200 leagues northwest from Santa Fe, is a pretty town, governed by a corregidor, has 3 churches, and lies on the river that runs down to Santa Fe. Hither the plate is brought from Potosi on mules, because the roads are bad, and from hence it is carried to Buenos Aires by wagons. Next to this town lies San Miguel de Toloman, 200 leagues northwest, then Salta, 150 leagues. This town contains 6 churches, then Ahui, 50 leagues further, which has 5 churches. Potosi is next, lies north of the Tropic of Capricorn, about south latitude 21, longitude 73. Our linguist tells us the city is large, has 10 churches governed by an archpriest. The town stands at the bottom of that called the Silver Hill, which is round like a sugar loaf. There are 1,500 or 2,000 Indians constantly at work in the mines there. They have 2 reals a day and are paid every Sunday. The mines are 100 fathom deep, and the silver is grown much scarcer of late. Provisions are scarce at this town, and they have no firing but charcoal, which is brought from 30 to 50 leagues distance. They have great frosts and snows here in May, June, and July. Knivet in his remarks says, in his time they were well supplied here with all things from the South Sea, and that the natives in the adjoining country trafficked in gold and precious stones, and hundreds of them plied upon the road to carry passengers from town to town in nets fastened to canes, and supported by 2 or more men, which was the easiest way of travelling, and they desired no other reward but a fish hook and a few glass beads. They have also sheep of an extraordinary size with large tails, upon which they carry jars of oil and wine. He says the rich ore, when taken out of these mines, looks like black lead. Then they grind it by certain engines and wash it through fine sieves into paved cisterns. They make the Indians and other slaves work quite naked in the mines, that they mayn't hide anything. The curious who would know more of the manners of the natives, or the history and particular product of this large country, may find it in Gemelli, Father Sepp, and Father Techo, but this is enough for my purpose, to show what a vast field of trade may be opened here, and how dangerous it may prove to all Europe if the House of Bourbon continue possessed of that trade. Some being of opinion that our South Sea Company may possess themselves, by virtue of the late act, of the river de la Plata, as far up that river and country as they please, either in the provinces of Paraguay or Tucuman, I shall give a further description of those large provinces, after taking notice that, according to several of our drafts, Paraguay lies both on the east and west side of the river La Plata, according to others entirely on the east side, and Tucuman on the west side. The Sansons make Paraguay 720 miles from south to north, and 480 where broadest from east to west, and place it betwixt south latitude 14 and 24, longitude 315 and 325, but the breadth is not equal. Father Techo says that the river Paraguay, which gives name to the country, is one of the greatest in America, receives several other large rivers, runs 300 leagues before it falls into the Parana, about 200 from the sea, is navigable, and together with the Parana forms the river La Plata. The word Paraguay in the language of the country signifies the crowned river, because the inhabitants wear crowns of feathers of several beautiful colours, which they have from the birds that abound in that country. I shall not insist upon the several nations that inhabit it, among whom the Garanians are the chief, and submitted first to the Spaniards, but growing weary of the slavery they subjected them to, revolted, and were with much difficulty subdued after their leaders were cut off, about 1539. The chief discovery of this country is owing to Dominic Irala, who in the reign of the Emperor Charles V was sent by the governor Alvaro Nunez Cabeza y Vaca with 300 chosen men, and went 250 leagues up this river to endeavour a communication with Peru, but was opposed by some of the natives, of whom 4,000 were killed and 3,000 taken in battle. The governor went afterwards on the discovery himself, and sailing up the river came to a delicious island, which his men called Paradise, and would have settled there, but he dissuaded them, and advancing to the borders of Peru, found a large town of 8,000 houses deserted by the inhabitants, who were affrighted with the noise of the Spanish firearms. 'Tis said they found in this town a great market-place with a wooden tower in the form of a pyramid built in the middle, and a monstrous serpent kept in it, by which the devil pronounced oracles. This serpent they killed with their firearms. But a difference happening betwixt the officers and soldiers about dividing the booty, they returned to Asuncion without pursuing the discovery any further. This province, till that of Tucuman was taken from it, contained all the country betwixt Brazil and Peru. Our author adds that besides the towns above mentioned, the Spaniards built here Corrientes on the conflux of the Paraguay and Parana, which is but a small town, no way suited to the dignity of these two rivers. That 100 leagues up the Parana, in the province of Huirana, the Spaniards built two little towns called Villarica and Guarica. That on the upper part of the Paraguay they built Xires and another Villarica to join Paraguay on that side to the further provinces, and lastly the city of Concepcion on the marshes of the Red River, which falls into Parana, and was of great use to curb the fierce nations in the neighbourhood. He adds that all these towns were first planted by a race of the noblest families in Spain. He mentions an extraordinary herb here called Paraguay by the name of the country. It grows in marshy grounds, and the leaves being dried and powdered and mixed with warm water, the Spaniards and natives drink it several times a day, which makes them vomit and strengthens their appetite. They look upon it as a sort of catolican, use it so much that they can't live without it, and this custom has so much overspread the neighbouring provinces that the inhabitants will sell anything to purchase it, though the excessive use of it occasions the same distempers as the immoderate use of wine. They did so fatigue the natives to gather and powder this herb that multitudes of them died, and this with other slavish employments did much dispeople the country. The natives live mostly by fishing, hunting, and shooting. Tucuman is 300 leagues long, but varies much in breadth. 'Tis inhabited by 4 nations. The furthest south have no fixed dwellings, live by fishing and hunting, and carry about mats to serve them for tents. The north people live in marshes and feed most on fish. The southern people are the tallest, but the northern the fiercest, and many of them live in caves, but those nearest Peru in villages. They are all very slothful, and have store of brass and silver, but make little use of them. They have large sheep which carry their burdens, and their wool is almost as fine as silk. They have many lions, not so large and fierce as those of Africa, but their tigers are fiercer than those of other countries. Their 2 chief rivers are Dulce and Salado, so called from the sweet and salt taste of their waters. They have multitudes of springs and lakes, some of which have a petrifying quality. The country was formerly very populous, but their numbers are much decreased since the Spaniards planted among them. They easily subdue this country, which was governed by abundance of petty princes continually at war with one another. This province was first discovered in 1530 by one Cesar, a soldier belonging to Sebastian Cabot, and 3 more at the time when Pizarro took Atabilipa, the great Inga of Peru. In 1540 the Viceroy of Peru, Vaca de Castro, assigned this country to John Rojas as a reward for his services. He went thither with 200 Spaniards, but was killed on the frontiers by a poisoned arrow, and his men under Francis Mendoza marched through to the river of Plate. Mendoza being killed as going up that river by mutineers, John Nunez Prada was sent hither by the Viceroy Peter Gasca, subdued the Indians, built the town of San Michel on the banks of river Escava, and settled friars there. This province was afterwards subjected to Chile, and Francis d'Aquire, being sent thither with 200 Spaniards, destroyed St. Michel and built Sant Jago, now the metropolis of Tucuman, on the river Dulce, in southern latitude 28, says Techo, but others place it on the river Salado. 'Tis the same town I have already described. In 1558, Tarita, being made governor of this province, built the city of London, near the borders of Chile, about latitude 29, calling it so out of compliment to Queen Mary of England, at that time married to Philip II. Of Spain. This town served to curb the natives. Tarita did likewise rebuild Saint Michel, and reduced the country so much that 80,000 Indians who submitted to Spain were mustered in the territory of San Jago. The Spaniards, as was usual in those days, fighting with one another about the command of the provinces, Tarita was drove out in 1561 by Castaneda, so that most of the natives revolted, till 1563, that Francis d'Aquire reduced them again and built Esteco, above mentioned. But the Spaniards contending afterwards with one another about the government, many of their settlements were destroyed, so that in Techo's time the chief places remaining in this country were San Jago, Cordoa, San Michel, Salta or Lerma, Zuzui or San Salvador, Rioja, Esteco or Nuestra Senora de Talavera, London, and a few other small garrisons. He says that in this country it does not rain in winter, but in summer they have thick mists and rains enough. The Jesuits are the chief missionaries here, and settled in the principal towns. He adds that near the city Concepcion, which is 90 leagues from San Jago, the natives were called frontones because they made the forepart of their heads bald. Their arms were a club at their girdle, bows and arrows, and staves set with jawbones of fishes. They went naked and painted their bodies to make them look terrible. They were continually at war among themselves about the limits of their land, and they fixed the bodies of their slain enemies in rows to the trunks of trees, that others might be afraid of invading their borders. He adds that the country about Saint Michel is well peopled, abounds with woods and all sorts of European and other fruits, so that it was called the land of promise, but they are much infested with tigers, which the natives kill with great dexterity. Guaira, a province of Paraguay, is very hot, because for the most part under the Tropic of Capricorn, is very fruitful, but subject to fevers and other diseases. Yet when the Spaniards came hither in 1550, they are said to have found 300,000 people in this country, but they say there's scarce a fifth part of that number now, and the natives are very miserable, having no meat but the flesh of wild beasts, nor bread but what they make of the root mandiosa. There are stones here which breed in an oval stone case about the bigness of a man's head. Our author says they lie underground, and when they come to maturity break with a noise like bombs, and scatter abundance of beautiful stones of all colours, which at first the Spaniards took to be of great value, but did not find them so. The other remarkable product of this country is a flower called granadillo, which the Jesuit says represents the instrument of our Saviour's passion, and produces a fruit as big as a common egg, the inside of which is very delicious. Number 2, a fruit called huembe, which is very sweet, but has yellow kernels, which if chewed occasions a sharp pain in the jaws. Number 3, dates, of which they make wine and pottage. Number 4, wild swine, which have their navel on their backs, and if not cut off immediately when the beast is killed, corrupts the whole carcass. Number 5, abundance of wild bees, several sorts of which yield store of honey and wax. Number 6, snakes, which dart from the trees and twist themselves about men and beasts, and soon kill them if they are not immediately cut in pieces. Number 7, macacua birds, so called because of an herb which they eat as an antidote when hurt by snakes, which lie and watch for them in the marshes. They frequently fight those snakes, for which nature has provided them with sharp beaks for a weapon, and strong wings to serve them as a buckler. Our author mentions the river Paranapan, which runs through this country, is almost as large as the Paraguay, and falls into the Parana. Its banks on both sides are covered with tall trees, especially cedars, of so vast a bulk that they make canoes out of a single trunk, which row with 20 oars. The Jesuits built the town of Loreto and Santa Ignatius, and 2 more near the conflux of this river and the Pirapus about 1610, and 11 more have since been built in that province, where they have brought over many of the inhabitants to their religion. They killed many of the Spaniards at first, and then ate them. These towns are placed by the Sansons about latitude 22 and betwixt longitude 325 and 330. Our author, not being distinct in describing the provinces of Paraguay and Tucuman, but sometimes confounding one with the other, I shall only add a few things more relating to those countries in general. He mentions a people called Guaycurians, who live on the banks of Paraguay near the city Asunción, maintain themselves by fishing and hunting, and eat all manner of serpents and wild beasts without hurt. They have tents of mats which they remove at pleasure. They daub one side of their bodies with stinking colours, scarify their faces to make them look terrible, suffer no hair to grow on their bodies, and instead of a beard fasten a stone of a finger's length to their chin, and make their deformity the standard of their valour. Their chief delight is in drunkenness and war, and to acquire the title and dignity of soldiers they must endure to have their legs, thighs, tongues, etc., bored with an arrow, and if they flinch in the least are not allowed that quality, and therefore they inure their children from their youth to all sorts of hardship, and to run thorns and briars into their flesh by way of pastime. They honour their commanders so much that when they spit they receive it into their hands, and stand about them when they eat, and observe all their motions. They chose to fight by night because they knew nothing of order, but made their onsets like beasts. They either killed or sold their prisoners, if at man's estate, and the young ones they bred to their own way. They lurked in marshes and woods by day, keeping spies abroad, and thus they plagued the Spaniards for above 100 years, till they were civilized by some missionaries. They would not allow their women to paint with a clay colour till they had tasted human flesh, and therefore when they killed enemies would divide them among the young women, or give them the corpse of their own dead. They planted trees over their graves, adorned them with ostrich feathers, and met there at certain times howling in a most barbarous manner, and performing many lewd and hellish ceremonies. They worship parrots as gods, and have a sort of bears called ant bears. They have long heads, snouts much longer than those of swine, and tongues like spears, which they thrust into the ant hills, and lick up those insects which are as big as the top of one's finger, and being toasted over the fire are ate by the natives and Spaniards too as a dainty. Father Techo mentions another people called Calcaquins in this country, whom he supposes to have been of Jewish descent, because when the Spaniards came first here they found that many of them had Jewish names and something of their habit and customs. Our author draws a parallel in several instances, but this, as well as his arguments to prove that St. Thomas the Apostle planted Christianity in this country, will scarce obtain credit among the learned. I refer the curious who would know more of these things to our author, who brings down what he calls the history of this country as low as 1645, which is the latest account we have yet printed, except Father Sepp's above mentioned, which brings it to 1691, of which I have given the substance already. Before I go further, I should give some account of the river Orinoco, or Orinoco, which is the northern boundary of our South Sea Company's limits. The head of it, according to our maps, is about north latitude 3 and in longitude 77. It runs eastward about 840 miles, about 60 miles north of the equator, then runs north about 420, and turning northeast about 120, falls into the sea about north latitude 9, so that its whole course is about 1,370 miles, including turnings and windings, for it runs almost the whole breadth of that part of America, since it rises within 160 miles of the South Sea. Mr. Sparrey, who was left in the adjoining country by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1595, Francis Sparrey, servant to one of Raleigh's captains, was left in Guiana in 1595. Eventually captured by the Spaniards, he escaped to England in 1602. Raleigh spoke of him as a man who could describe a country with a pen, and his description of Guiana is included in Volume 4 of Purchas Pilgrims, 1625. He said it is also called Betaquan, is a great river, and others call it Parie. It falls into the sea by 16 mouths, but according to Sanson's map, what Sparrey calls mouths are a number of islands which lie near the shore at the entrance of the river, and the chief of those mouths, named Capuri, lies furthest south. They say it has 9 foot water at full sea, but 5 at ebb. It flows but a small time when it rises apace, and the ebb continues 8 hours. There are several other ways of entering this river, for which I refer to Sparrey, as also for the other rivers which fall into it on both sides. He attempted a passage to Peru this way, but in vain. He says that in his search he entered the great river Papemena, which is 6 leagues broad, and came to a pleasant island called Atul, where the climate is temperate. The island is well watered and abounds with fish, fowls, and other animals for food. It has many woods that abound with delicate fruit all the year. There is store of cotton, balsam, Brazil wood, lignum vitae, cypress trees, several minerals, and fine stones, but for want of skill he could not judge of the value of them. This island was not then inhabited because of the cannibals named Caribes in the neighbourhood. He is of opinion that westward from Orinoco gold might be found, but it was dangerous to go far into the country because the natives were continually in arms. He adds that in the country of Curay, part of the province of Guiana, which lies on the south and east of Orinoco, there was plenty of gold, but it was dangerous seeking for it in the sands of the rivers because of crocodiles. He talks also of pearl or topazes found here, but dubiously. At Camalaja, south of Orinoco, he says there was then a fair for women slaves, where he bought 8 for a coarse red-hafted knife, the eldest of whom was not above 18 years old. The inhabitants, he says, are generally swarthy. We have few modern accounts of this river, because it is not much frequented for trade, and therefore I shall say no more of it, but return to my journal. End of Section 6.